try to find our places to sit.
We've never actually face-to-face met. How you doing, sir? Good. But we've been on phone calls together and everything, so she wanted to officially.
What a treat. I love the student member.
But, of course, the account's blank, too, so it doesn't matter, right?
I might need you for quorum. I may need you. All right, this is embarrassing, John. I don't know that I got quorum. I don't know that I did. Anne's not on. She's not on the committee.
Yeah. Another part of that previous discussion of paying penance.
You look like you're feeling good.
I don't know. I don't. Stanley is, I believe. Is Stanley here? Oh, there's Stanley. Okay. Hey, Mikey, do I have quorum? I'm 10 minutes late already. No, it's not. I hate starting off late. If you want your meeting to start on time, you start your meeting on time. Edward? Edward's not here. You sure? Perfect. Great. We are indeed. Do I need to move? Okay. Come, you ready to call roll? I'm going to go ahead and call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. We apologize, we're starting a little bit late. Mikey, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Parker, not here. Mr. Barnes?
Present.
Mr. Edwards? Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Mr. Temple?
Here.
Mr. Tripp?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you, Mikey. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the new year, our new budget cycle. Oh, happy days. I know the second item on the agenda calls for a presentation of the SUS-LBR and the Board General Office budget. It is rumored that the governor may be here tomorrow to roll out his education budget and his proposals for higher ed. And out of respect for the governor, we are going to defer consideration of the LBR this afternoon until tomorrow when the governor arrives, if he does, and we'll do that in the full board meeting, and if he's not there, we'll do it in the full board meeting anyway. But we're going to defer that conversation until tomorrow. As far as this meeting is concerned, we are going to take up and address the Board General Office budget, and I'd like to ask Tim Jones to walk us through the budget and give us some thoughts. We do have some changes in there and some hopefulness. So, Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 5 of your packet is the Board General Office budget request, and you can see the first column is what the committee and the board adopted last September. You know, the chancellor had just started right before then, so we didn't have really any issues at that time. So Chancellor Brogan has had a chance to look at the office operations and wants to amend our LBR, particularly related to 3 issues shown in column 3, or in that middle column on page 5 says additional issues. Almost $49,000 is requested for some business intelligence software to allow us to take all the data that we have that's being reported in our annual reports, being able to build our dashboards, put those on our websites, and really make it an interactive tool. We're also asking for $110,000 in basic operating expenses, and these are explained on page 6 and 7. And then row number 10, $344,000 to fill some vacant positions. And what this PowerPoint slide here in front of you shows our office budget over the last 5 years, the number of positions we've had, and our proposed LBR for next year. So we currently have 53 authorized positions. Only 49 of those are filled because we do not have the funds to fill the other 4. So this $344,000 would allow us to fill those 4 positions, one being a key chief academic officer that the chancellor would like to bring in to kind of take some of the load off of Dottie, who's worked extremely hard on various academic issues. And then the remaining funds would support 3 analyst-type positions, budget, finance, and academic affairs. And I'll be glad to answer any questions the committee may have.
Any questions for Tim on the board general office budget?
I just have one question. On the 110, in the explanation, it looks like you repeat the 48.8. You've got
Governor Tripp, could you
intelligence tools and network connectivity. And
Governor
then
Tripp, could you let us know what page you're on so we can all follow?
Yeah, you remember he talked about the 3 items, which is page 5?
Yes.
In the middle? Well, 48.8 is on the next page, the back of 5 is the 6, which just says business intelligence tools and network connectivity, right? And then you go down to 4, and it says another 110,000, and then it repeats again to fund the connectivity and the business. Are they separate?
They are separate. The item number...
I thought they were, but it doesn't look...
Well, item 3 is the actual, it's non-recurring funds for one-time purchase of the software and the network connectivity. Item 4 includes the recurring costs associated with maintenance and upgrading of those tools, along with some other expenses.
Okay.
So they're related, but different.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you to Governor Tripp. Any other questions? Yeah. Governor Barnes.
Tim, you touched on the one chief academic officer position, and you mentioned the other 3 slightly, but could you go a little bit more in detail about the other 3 positions and the importance of funding those positions?
Yes, I'll be glad to do that. We have had two retirements and one person who's left the office who was on maternity leave, decided not to come back last summer. So one is a budget position that we've had, one is a facilities and finance position that we've had, and this other one is an academic affairs position. So those are critical positions that we had. People have retired. They retired last fiscal year. We received budget cuts this year, so we just didn't have the funds to fill those. But so those staff, particularly in budget and finance, only have 4 people in budget, 4 people in finance. One of those positions is vacant, so they're about 25% down in their staff. So they are critical functions. They're duties that are done every year, developing LBRs, doing our finance work. So they are critical to just our basic ongoing operations.
Mr. Chair, just one more question. Could I defer to the Chancellor, though? Is that all right if I ask a question to the Chancellor?
Of course. Now, the Chancellor can choose whether he decides to answer that.
Of course. Of course. No, Chancellor, when...
I have an answer. The question is, will you be able to understand it? You know me.
Chancellor...
We made this dinner tonight.
Hey, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. Chancellor, when we visited the office back in September, you had talked about hopes of a possible vice chancellor to deal with the academics. Is this kind of what the chief academic officer position that Tim's talking about, or is that something separate?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, it is our hope going forward that at some point, you know, the office of the chancellor for the Board of Governors has, suffice it to say, taken quite a beating over the last several years. And as we develop some of the new accountability programs, some of the new work that we're going to have to do in order to better organize the whole system, we're going to need a little bit of help. As most people know, I'm not an empire builder, but it has shrunk to the point where I can get my whole staff pretty much around my desk for a meeting, and they're great people, but the advances that I think the Board of Governors is looking at making on behalf of the system and with the system will require some additional help.
Great, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Morris.
And I do want to remind the committee that out of our 49 filled positions, 20 of those are being paid for from stimulus funds. So we may have one more year of stimulus funding to get through, and then we're going to be in really big trouble come next year, just like all the universities will be in a similar situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Tim. Any other questions for Tim? Tim, you're a ray of sunshine, as usual. Thank you for that. Is there a motion to approve the board budget? This motion is seconded. Any further discussion? Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Tim. In your packet is our report with regard to tuition differential. As everyone recalls, during the 2009 legislative session, there was a statutory change passed that allowed all universities to establish a tuition differential fee based upon this Board of Governors approval. The statutory change also requires that a tuition differential approval and monitoring process be established by the board, which we did last year through revision of 7.001 of the Regulation 7.001. In addition, that statute also requires that the board file a report to the legislature by January 1st of each year, and the report we are reviewing today will in the future be incorporated into the strategic plan report that we're going to talk about later on in the meetings, but it was filed separately to meet the January 1 deadline. Dan Cohen-Vogel is going to talk to us a little bit about the report and the monitoring and where we go from here. The plan is we're going to go back to the legislature and see if we can't get the strategic planning report and this report and all other reports to have specific deadlines, hopefully in February as part of our annual report submission as opposed to doing it in January. Dan, you want to walk us through the report?
Sure. Thank you. The report, as you said, the report you have in your packet was already provided to the Senate President, the Speaker, and the Governor with a note that is pending approval at this board meeting, and we hope to have that aligned with the dates aligned better in the future. Just to lay out some background, refresh memories, prior to this year, there was a tuition differential last year that 5 universities charged. This report looks retrospectively at what happened with that, as well as looking at the current year and the board's actions regarding implementation, and in particular looking at the changes that happened this year that removed the criteria that limited it to those 5 universities, expanding it to all 11, giving the board responsibility for reviewing those proposals, approving, and for the accountability going forward. It changed the cap on them from the percentage of tuition to a more comprehensive look at tuition and fees and linking the tuition differential to the national average of all tuition and fees. It set a 30% requirement that 30% of those funds be used for need-based financial aid for undergraduates, and had some specific accountability provisions both with regard to the financial aid and with regard to performance. And I'll talk a little bit about both how the board and universities have implemented and moved forward with that. And that's what the report covers, and those issues. In 2008-9, the 5 universities that charged the fee raised roughly $10.3 million from it. The funds were used to hire faculty and advisors. That was the majority, I believe. Maintain some course offerings and maintain or improve different student support services. With the changes in 2009, on a fairly tight turnaround from the time that the bill became law until the board needed to act so that the universities could then get those prices out to students. You approved the proposals that came in last June, and we have continued since then to monitor the revenues, the expenditures of those, as well as the other provisions related to accountability and financial aid that I'll talk about in a minute. As you noted, you revised the tuition and fee regulation to outline that a process for approval and for as well as appeal of any board decisions, and to specify how that financial aid accountability should work to guarantee that those monies that are set aside for financial aid are, as intended by the board and the legislature, incremental increases to need-based aid for undergraduates, and rather than supplanting existing need-based aid. and you adopted a university work plans and annual report regulation, which included the tuition differential related performance measures that are in this report and that are also included in the annual reports that will be discussed in the Strategic Planning Committee tomorrow. I would say that we've had some questions about the process going forward. The basic framework that you followed this year and the kind of the template that universities use to provide their proposals, we don't expect that to be very different, with some caveats that I think we've heard from board members and others that there's an expectation for a little more detail in subsequent years, now that we've got more time to do planning and to have some back and forth and discussion about the proposals. More detail in terms of the expected expenditures of the money, and as well as the performance measures and how these investments are intended to change those, as well as just giving us more time in general to work with universities and get a good sense for the board of how that of how all those things are going to play out and how the money is going to be used. So in summary, for this year, we've got 11 universities charging a differential fee that ranges from $5.74 to $13.74 per credit hour. The total revenue expected is this is a minor error. This $37.9 million includes a small bit, a few $1 million in carry forward that was collected at the end of the previous year and is planned to be spent this year. So there's about 34 million that's actually collected this year, and out of that, 10.4 million is set aside for need-based financial aid. The other uses of the funds in addition to the financial aid, institutions many are hiring new faculty and advisors with the money, and improving some support services or compensation for existing faculty and staff, increasing course offerings, maintaining or improving student services, and supporting some specific programs that are intended to enhance or individualize instruction for undergraduates. In past meetings, you also asked for some more specific information, at least in the first year or two, to get a sense of how in a more real-time or current year manner of how the money is being used toward financial aid. We've done our best this past term to survey institutions in terms of the financial aid collections and disbursements that happened as of the end of October of this year. There were, as of October 31st, $7.8 million had been awarded from tuition differential funds toward need-based aid, and an additional $146,000 in waivers of tuition differential were granted. You'll notice that the $7.8 million is pretty close to the $10 million total that was expected for this year, and that's because we've got different institutions have different practices. In some cases, they were awarding money in September, in August, September, making awards for the entire year based on expected collections, so that the awards they're reporting to us are full year awards, and in other cases they're awarding money based on as the money comes in, and so it was so there's variation in budgeting practices in that regard, and we can be, as we go forward, refine that process to give you a little more consistent real-time kind of information. In addition, based on the regulation you passed, we worked with universities to develop just a standard form for collecting the different sources of financial aid going to need-based as well as non-need-based awards, so that we could establish a baseline this year to monitor the compliance with the statute, with the requirement that 30% go toward need-based aid, that it not supplant other sources of need-based aid, and that also goes to help. That process also helps us track compliance with other statutes and proviso language related to need-based financial aid.
Oh, Governor Tripp, of course.
And because it relates to that, on page 39, could you explain to me if this is what I think it is? It's under Florida State, and it says these funds will be used to replace non-recurring funds used to support. Is that? I thought it was supposed to be in addition to what they were already doing. And so the question is, it looks to me that it goes right to the heart of what Governor Perez and I were concerned about, is that the 30% is new money. It's not to supplant anything that was there. So, I mean, how are we bringing that together?
That's a good question. We've had some. Do you want to answer the question? Sure.
Dr. Abel.
Governor Tripp and Governor Perez, if you recall, about 2 meetings ago, I met with you and showed you all of our financial aid data and how we were setting it up. And what he's referring to is we at that time had 4 accounts, and one of the accounts was money we moved every year, sweeps at the end of the year, toward financial aid. So that was not part of the foundation, the financial aid fee, or the legislatively set dollars. So we are operating completely within both the letter and the spirit of the law, and contribute way more in need-based financial aid than is required under any of those scenarios. So we weren't in any way, that's why I made the effort to sit down with both of you to go over the figures to make sure that we were clear in what we were doing. We have no intention whatsoever of not honoring the spirit and the letter of the law.
Maybe that should have been written a little differently. I mean, it just reads that way.
Yes.
Do you agree that?
And I apologize for that.
Yeah, it kind of reads that way, and I just wanted. I was actually helping you out this time.
I
wanted to
appreciate
kind of
that.
get the record clear that you are doing that, and so that somebody else doesn't look at it and say, well, hell, they're not following it. You know?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, and I apologize for not being clear. I should have used the same documents that I shared with you and Governor Perez. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Abel. Dan, anything else?
The final slide just summarizes the place in your regulations where the performance measures are identified. There were specific measures identified in statute. Those are included in the annual report that were intended to the extent that those are where they may be different for each university, but that those are measures that reflect different uses of money toward undergraduate education, and so tracking those going forward, as well as any other metrics that the universities provide as they provide their work plans and identify specific uses of the money and metrics that would be used to track the impact of those investments going forward. And so what we've got this year are really data through 2008-9, before this tuition differential went into effect, that are establishing a baseline so that going forward we'll have some starting point for tracking movement of the needle on those different undergraduate-related performance measures.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any questions? Yes, Dr. Sloan.
I have 2 quick questions on page 18 of the report, or 28 of our packet. Undergraduate course offerings. Since we have a gray shaded copy, it's a little bit hard to ascertain which section is what. Is the bottom section under 30 students?
Yes, it is.
30 and 50, 50 and 100, and over 100 in that order?
Yes, it is.
And is on the next page, 19, page 29, is it the same? Bottom section is faculty?
The bottom section is faculty, yes.
Then adjunct, then graduate student, followed by other. Okay, thank you.
Is that all, Dr. Salah?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Dan? Yes, Governor Barnes.
Yeah, Dan, last year, because of time constraints, this process was expedited. But what are we in the BOG staff and as the Board of Governors, what are you going to do to hold the universities accountable, basically, to ensure that these increases are necessary? What do we have planned this year?
I'm actually going to talk about next year's process as soon as we approve this year's report. We'll have a full conversation about that coming up, Governor Barnes.
Perfect.
Any other questions on the report? Dan, I do have one comment. As you know, Governor Tripp and I have both been fairly focused on this need-based financial aid issue. I still feel like we're apples and oranges, and it's still very hard to track and verify and make certain that the legislature knows that we are doing exactly what we said we would do and the universities are complying. So we've talked a little bit before this meeting. We're looking for some additional metrics, and hopefully we'll be able to standardize the process so that notwithstanding some full-year grants, some partial-year grants, some funds moving over from other accounts, we've got to find a way that we can set up a series of metrics to prove exactly that we are following the legislative requests. I know last year was a tough time. It was a short period. I'm actually very pleased with the report and the status of the report, but I do want to make certain that we establish the appropriate metrics so that we can at least apples to apples the universities, so the legislature gets a clear picture that we are following the rules. Madam Chair.
I think that the point raised by Governor Tripp and the response would merit that we try to clarify this language, even though we've already submitted the report. The report was submitted with our
subject to our approval.
Pending, so let's clarify it as best we can, and then we can resubmit it in that form. It's at least it will be of record. And the other thing is, I would like everybody to remember that these graphs in here establish a baseline, and even though it's only partial year, it is representative of the last 5 years, and that the legislature's really going to be looking for improvements off these numbers. So everybody needs to, whether you like the format or not, familiarize yourself with what's in there, because that's when you go to do your work plans and your targets and everything, which will then form the basis of our reporting structure going forward, you'll have to take into account where you're starting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan, I'm going to ask you to work with Provost Abel. Provost Abel, would you coordinate with Dan so we can amend the report so that it reflects what we've just discussed? Thank you. And then, Dan, when that's done, if you'll just send that out, I'd love to put eyes on it before we give it a final. Chancellor?
Mr. Chairman, and if this is the wrong place to do this, based on what you just said to Governor Barnes, I'll be glad to wait. But before we're finished, I wanted to talk a little bit, too, about my communications with the presidents and the BOT chairs regarding the fact that this will be the first full-time through with the differential reporting, and also looking forward at the next round of tuition setting process, and that because of the timeliness of this and the fact that it will now be considerably more complicated because it is now a function of the universities and the legislature, as well as the metrics, that the faster these conversations begin at the institution level, among BOT members, among students, student groups, to Board of Trustee members, etc., the less problematic this will tend to be at the end, when it's time to finally approve whatever tuition level people are looking to at the local level. So typically we all have to wait until the legislative process is completed to decide what tuition is going to be, for the most part. Now with differential, we've got to have these conversations beginning a lot earlier than they have in the past.
Chancellor, I'll follow your and Governor Barnes' segue then and move to that topic. Before we do that, is there a motion to approve the report as containing the subsequent adjustments that Provost Abel, Dan, and I will make?
So moved.
There's a motion from Governor Barnes. Is there a second? And second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. And opposed. Motion carries. Now let's go ahead and move into the conversation that we were trying to have. I want to just stay with this theme. Last fall, we did run through a quick timeline to develop the submission for this report, and we worked with staff and went to some meetings and some figuring sessions to try to come up with some kind of metrics that happened. We also consulted with Governor Barnes subsequent to make certain that we have timelines in place that are going to work for establishing the tuition differential for next year. Back in December, I did ask Mikey to send a proposed timeline to the presidents and the members of this committee, and the timeline's on page 83 of the packet if you want to take a look at it. My goal is to have universities submit their appropriate request forms to the committee, so we'll have an opportunity to actually take a look and review the information before acting on any of them prior to our June meeting. If you recall, last year we were asked to act on some in anticipation of a subsequent Board of Trustees meeting, and that created a big conflict for us. So the goal is to have everything completed prior to our June meeting so that we can act in one meeting in June on all of the tuition differential requests. right now it's my expectation that we'll probably take a half a day of our June meeting and hear presentations for the universities on the success of this year's tuition differential, as well as justification and explanation for the planned fee increase, if any, from those universities for next year for the upcoming fall term. Staff is going to be looking at last year's report, this report, and numbers to help me and work in creating a metric that actually works so that we can compare apples to apples and make certain we're appropriately complying and communicating that compliance with the statute. It's extremely important that we start this process as quickly as possible. Universities and student leaders get the conversation going now for what the potential tuition differentials may be. I know we're not going to know what the budget is going to be. We're not going to know if there's what the extent of tuition increase, if any, comes from the legislature, but we shouldn't wait until the 1st of May to start those conversations, and I would urge that we start that planning now. Chancellor, anything else?
No, sir. He just said it.
Okay. Governor Barnes?
Mr. Chair, we've been involved with these conversations. The Chancellor's made sure to have us heavily involved. When we came over in November, we sat down about the timeline and different things. And one of the greatest points that was of our concern it is addressed in this timeline, which is the face-to-face meeting to really review it and to take the time. Again, we were rushed last year, but if you recall, I mean, the teleconference for this was, I think, maybe 20 minutes, and that was something that didn't, while we had to expedite the process, it didn't necessarily send the right message either, and a big reason why the students were so supportive in this measure, as they were last year, was the assurance that the Board of Governors would be the check with the Board of Trustees on these proposals. So that's one of the greatest things right there that we see. Another thing, though, is just, as someone touched on, I'm not sure, one of you touched on the last presentation, I really feel that the reports need to be, I think it was Governor Tripp, I'm not surprised, of course. I think that the reports need to be more in depth, though. I mean, we'll look at UNF, so there's no favoritism, and they did a great job, but it's not even 2 pages, and I understand the 5 things that are laid out, and I just feel that for the $1.5 million that they're getting out of increases on student fees, I feel that we deserve more than a page and a half of exactly where it's going to go.
Well, we'll discuss that as we go through the process on the ultimate reporting cycle. I know there is much data behind that page-and-a-half summary that was submitted to the legislature. I know Tim and Dan and the staff have worked through that, Governor Barnes. But point taken. And hopefully we'll have a process that begins early. The face-to-face meetings can start. And as we develop the metric system, everything will be consistent. It may not be much longer, but it'll be consistent. Governor Duncan.
I guess I just would say, though, I think we got to really balance the fact that our audience on this also is the legislature and other people, and if it gets too long, I mean, I think it's really important. Sometimes it's harder to convey all the important comments in less words than more, and so maybe if there's more background or things you want, it can go in appendix or something, but I would hate to get the message too long, for the broader audience that isn't necessarily going to read through a lot of detail.
But certainly point taken, and I know that the backup documentation is much more severe. Other questions or thoughts there? Universities, presidents, any thoughts? I know we were all under a time constraint last year. This year, hopefully, we'll be able to run through the process. Okay. Seeing none, there was no motion required there. Let me call on Governor Duncan to give us an update on shared services and the Shared Services Committee.
Great. Good afternoon. We have been working on a number of initiatives, and I know that we've kind of periodically talked with, given updates. And just as a brief recap, where we started with this probably over a year ago was trying to get a laundry list of different ideas and things that could provide some savings if the institutions were to better leverage their purchasing power or whatever host of things. And what we focused on first was some things that we thought could provide, to use the phrase low-hanging fruit, but that would be, things that could be accomplished easily, get some good success under our belt. Again, working from the concept that this shared services did not mean centralization. It just meant better leveraging of the opportunities. It could be something that one institution takes the lead on. It could be something that's centralized, or it could be something that just a group of institutions do, or it could be something that the entire system adopted. Yeah, it was just kind of the framework in which we started. And so we've had some pretty significant savings in the risk management area. We've been leveraging some of the ideas and the energy savings and performances. We've been trying to line up a lot of the purchasing agreements, because one of the challenges was if we want to go bid copiers or we want to go bid whatever, all the institutions had different contractual obligations for their equipment. So rather than just accepting it something we can't do, we've been working to try to align those contracts and to be able to be in a position to better leverage those things. Really, as the budgets have continued to work, and just because this is good business and common sense, though, we've tried to now broaden it. We've also had a lot of musical chairs of our early kind of task force members, give me a good example, and trying to really step back out, because we started with, one group, but now we're working with the purchasing group. And the reality of it is, even when I speak with the student affairs VPs, what are things they're doing and kind of, that could be better leveraged, and really trying to broaden our base on it. We've got 4 or 5 new initiatives that are going, but really, and my co-chair of this committee is here as well. Rick, I don't know if you want to join for this or anything. But what we're really trying to go back now, though, is say, okay, we've done some of this stuff, but what are we missing? Where is some of the biggest spend? Where can we be more strategic? Where can we bring the dialogue going forward? But in the meantime, we have several new initiatives I want to make you aware of. Florida Atlantic is leading a media buying program right now, where they're identifying and contacting different groups within the system to gauge their requirements and putting together an ITN to do some of the media buy. And they think that this draft will be, the ITN or their solicitation will be out in late February. A primary academic book vendor is a program that Florida State is leading for us, and they feel by having a statewide contract for primary domestic book vendor, community colleges, public and private universities can purchase more materials at greater discounts, reduce their processing and cataloging costs, and reduce duplication and increased holdings of unique content within the state. And so again, and it's not just the system, it really is reaching out to community colleges and other groups and finding where it does make sense to do these types of things. They've had a little bit of issue because I guess there's not an abundance of these type of vendors trying to, they were getting close, and then there was one bought another, and so it's complicated. But it is moving forward and making steady progress. Another area was the multimedia AV equipment that Central Florida is leading for us, and they began their research, and they're trying to get a solicitation out by now, I guess. I don't know if we have an update on it, but late January, early February on that will help, control the spend on the AV equipment. And the last one is the office supplies, and Central Florida is also leading that one, and they've actually are in contract negotiations on that solicitation, so we can't get into a lot of detail on it right now, but they're negotiating that, and basically what they're going to do for that is make the contract be one that others can piggyback on, is I guess the procurement phrase, but they're going to try to have their contract expire in 2011 so that it'll synchronize with the other universities, and then we can really go for a much bigger procurement on the office supply front as well. So we are trying to get the group kind of reconvened. We'll have more discussion, I think, on this subject tomorrow as well. And but do know that we're still on it and focused and looking for ideas, and also looking for how do we roll these out beyond this core group of universities that have been participating and doing some of the heavy lifting. We need I know there's great things happening at each institution, so we need to get those ideas kind of further, explored as a system application.
Question, Governor Duncan.
Oh, I'm sorry, just one other thing. There was an interesting article in Governing magazine, can higher ed control its costs? We're clearly not alone in this. Maryland's been doing some collaborative purchasing. Louisiana, a number of different states are looking at this. And, and I think the big thing that was important, and, one of the interesting things in this article is the fact that it needs to not just be a stopgap measure during the bad times, that it really needs to be a good business practice that has an ongoing implication and and value add.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perfect segue. As you know, the Chair and I and others around this table have been discussing and beginning to formulate what a regulation might look like that would better formalize the efficiency process. Presidents know best the question, when is a budget cut an efficiency measure? Typically, we reduce our budgets as we have significantly over the past few years, and then we get the question from some, great, now what kinds of efficiency measures are you engaging in at your institution? Clearly, we have gotten from the powers that be little or no credit for the significant efficiency measures that have been created amid all of the budget reductions over the last 3 years. You cannot reduce budgets the way the institutions have for the past 3 years without creating greater efficiencies. The question, and it goes to the article that Governor Duncan was talking about, is where do we go from here? And not only would we like to more formalize this process on an annualized basis to better coordinate what sorts of efficiencies each institution are creating, what efficiencies are being created amongst all of us in the system, but ultimately produce a reporting mechanism that will show anyone who cares to look or needs to see that we are engaged in efficiency activities every year, not only on an institutional level, but now with greater significance on a system-wide level as well. So we hope that it will not place, I don't think it will, an additional burden on institutions. That's not the intent. The intent is just to better organize all of our efficiency efforts and the chronicling of those efficiency efforts so people will better understand what we are doing on a daily and annualized basis.
Thank you, Chancellor. Co-Chair Walsh, anything to add? No. Questions for President Hitt?
If I may just comment,
Could you move the mic over, President? I can't.
On what the Chancellor just said, I think it's important to realize we've had our budgets cut 27%, and that really doesn't reflect the full picture. If you go to the Delta Project report, higher education in Florida was found to be the most efficient in the nation. Now, that's not to say that that it isn't possible to become even more efficient and productive. I think it is. But I think we don't do ourselves a service if we don't point out that we are already the most efficient and productive system in the nation. And so if people want to say you need to be even more efficient, you need to be even more productive, fine. But let's not proceed from the assumption that, well, we're just average. Maybe we're just the best of a bad lot. But at least give us credit for being the best.
Madam Chair.
Let me just respond to you, President Hitt, because I appreciate what you're saying. And in connection with some conversations that I have begun with people in the legislature, we have prepared a whole lot of data. And one of the sections that we've prepared are all of the efficiencies that we have been able to identify. So I would therefore encourage everybody to keep very good track of those things. And then point out, just as you did, that we have been rated as the most efficient system. But that did not stop the comment, and that is that they want to see a process that makes everybody comfortable that efficiencies are being looked at on a routine basis. So that really is what we're talking about here, is to be able to have in place the obligation to go through a process, which, everybody does that, but there's just some little bit of formality to it, because it's going to all be part and parcel again of the work plans and the annual reports, and the idea would be that we go through it. Some years you can do something, sometimes you can't.
Please understand, Madam Chairman, that I understand and support that.
Right.
Governor Tripp.
The question I have is, we're far enough along now with the efficiency. are we connecting every university into it so that we have some platform that each purchasing officer or each person in charge at a university can look to see what's out there? And that's where I think, I know that's what she's talking about, but it's good to report. It's good to do what we're doing individually. I think the issue that I share with her is getting the system in place where we know we're sharing system-wide all of these best practices so that we can step up and show as a system that we have in place the ability for each university to be able to hone in immediately, and if they have an interest, you may not have an interest all the time, but if you do have an interest, be able to touch that information immediately, and that it expands and it grows.
And I think there's a board discussion tomorrow kind of on the subject about the expanded portion of it, or how do we make it more systematic. And I think, as we look at some of these ideas too, just making sure that everyone, understands that where the opportunities are, and that, there is some logic to, if someone's not participating, why as well. I mean, it's going to be a bit of a back and a forth in getting it established, but that's exactly the track we're on.
If you have somebody giving you $1 million a year support, you may not want to take the $100,000 contract away from them. There are issues like that, but you want to see the opportunity is what I hope we get to.
Chancellor.
Mr. Chair, just real quickly, exactly what you're talking about is we're already doing this. How do you institutionalize it? How do you chronicle it so that you not only have an organized approach to it, but an organized way of reporting it so that people can acknowledge it, see what you're doing, and also, as you mentioned, and it's key, see the best practices that are available that they can mirror, and to pool, whenever possible, resources and the power of the whole or parts of the whole for greater efficient opportunities. So institutionalizing it is critical.
But also understand the complexity of this is that even at institutions, some of the procurements don't happen in a centralized manner. So there's a lot of different layers to this as well. So
It's true in every business.
Great. Other questions or issues for Governor Duncan? If not, Governor Duncan, thank you for your report. In your packet, there's one additional item to talk about. It is not on the agenda. It's in your green folders. If you recall, at our Budget Committee meeting last June, there was about a 10-minute, 15-minute presentation on public-private partnerships and how to use some alternative financing mechanisms to advantage and create some flexibility for our universities and our campuses. Several members of the board expressed interest in the concept, and frankly, since then, we know some of the universities have explored that option. Interest in public-private partnerships, or P3s, has increased, especially in our challenging economic times. Flexibility is essential, and I think that we should try to make some changes in the Florida statutes and in our BOG policy that maybe needed to facilitate and streamline some processes for universities, for P3s, to make this a tool that more universities can use if they choose to do so with the appropriate process in place. For example, if you recall, we heard at that June meeting, a university can monetize parking system assets, use a resulting lump sum payment to contract for other critically needed infrastructure, classrooms, and possibly expanding on that idea, we could also use those funds for funding non-recurring purposes, centers of excellence, matching Cortellis grants, things of that nature. The concept here is to give universities additional flexibility to work through new and innovative financing structures in these difficult financial times. Obviously, any legislative action will be needed. Legislative action will be needed to provide some safeguards in place and to require a competitive process, be it an RFP or an ITN or any other procurement method. And to that end, I asked staff to take a look at the Florida statutes and come up with a few tweaks and changes to the statutes that we would recommend in our board legislative packet to provide the necessary flexibility to the universities to at least examine these kinds of financing structures subject to appropriate review. So I want to bring that language, and it's in your packet, to the committee today. If it's acceptable, we'll want to bring it to the board tomorrow to include in our legislative packet for this year. The language is there. It's in your green folder. It's fairly straightforward. Chris, is there anything you would want to add? it merely incorporates the use of P3s into the existing structures of the rules and regulations.
Yeah, could I?
Chancellor, please.
Yeah, not only do I endorse the concept, but would say the way that it's being laid out, because you've got legislative involvement in this, et cetera, and we'll talk certainly more about this tomorrow, Governor, but under your direction. But the idea is to leverage the power of state assets whenever practical and whenever determined at the local board level with appropriate participation by the Board of Governors to allow local universities to make decisions as to how they might monetize their own assets at the local level. And it may not be right for everybody, and or maybe there's something there for everybody, but it really does create, in a world where this is happening all over the country, some opportunities for universities and systems to be able to better use the assets that they have available to them under the right set of circumstances. So it is something that you really ought to take a look at, and I know the Governor's prepared to discuss it much more tomorrow, but it is a good concept.
Governor Parker.
I just have a quick question, Mr. Chairman. Is this something that other universities are doing in other parts of the country, or is this something that
Oh, yes. No. Universities in various parts of the country are doing this, as are municipalities, and many local governments are accessing capital in this way. Yes.
I know I was aware of the local governments and I guess other parts of government, but had not heard of universities. So this is great.
Yes, they are. Other questions? Yes, Governor.
Yeah, I just saw this for the first time, but why are the proceeds solely for fixed capital outlay?
They're not. It's not solely for fixed capital outlay. In fact, what we've done in the language, if you will take a look at it, was to create some flexibility so that it could also be used for one-time, non-recurring grants, for matching centers of excellence type programs. The whole idea here is to broaden the ability to use those funds from just a fixed capital outlay.
It doesn't say that in the second page here.
Well, I think there is an addition somewhere. Yeah. Chris, you want to point that out?
Governor Perez, this is just strictly a draft of the statutory language, so it's not written in probably a real clear way, and there's certainly room for improvement. But what is Governor Perez is exactly right. This takes several sections of law and changes them. So what if you go to the second page where it has the reference to 101147, this is the existing language for auxiliary enterprises and for contracts and grants and donations. This is how the board and the universities manage and account for these funds under law. And so we've added a reference to public-private partnerships. So we say in there, notwithstanding 1013-19. 1013-19, which is also included, would restrict it for capital purposes. But by notwithstanding 1013-19, and I'm not an attorney, but I believe that would have the effect of allowing it to be used for auxiliary purposes such as centers of excellence or for matching gifts. The concept is to allow the use of these dollars for non-recurring purposes. Typically we think non-recurring capital outlay, but also centers of excellence. What we want to try to avoid, I believe, is to use it to plug the budget, to monetize an asset, plug the budget, and then you solve it's a one-time solution, and what do you do the next year? I've done some research. It is being used nationally. What the studies indicate, and I'd be glad to provide some of these to any member who's interested, is there's good public-private partnerships, and those are the ones that are done in a thoughtful way and used for in a strategic manner. And I know certainly that's what Governor Perez is looking on this. The ones that are not as strategic are the one-time budget gimmick type, and I know that's certainly not what this board would endorse.
And that's what this language would prevent as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's not for recurring funds. It would either be capital or the one-time efforts, Governor. Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to advance this to the Board of Governors for consideration tomorrow and inclusion into our legislative package? And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. That concludes our agenda for the Budget and Finance Committee. We will take up the LBR tomorrow at the full board meeting. Whether or not the governor is here, we're hopeful that he will make it and present his budget, and hopefully it'll look a lot like ours. We stand adjourned.
You want to talk for a couple minutes?
No,
or
no, I just want to take a break, yes.
You're going to take a break.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take about a 5-minute break,
Yes.
and we'll reconvene with Governor Parker's committee.
Thank you very much.